Rely on the meteorologists from Fox 11 Severe Weather Team to keep you informed. Fox 11, your station for severe weather coverage.
I'm Chris Wallace. A former top Iraqi official says his country is in a civil war. Next on Fox News Sunday. The battle for Iraq 3 years later. The war was won with shock and awe. But what about securing the peace? We'll examine the situation on the ground from Baghdad with General George Casey, commander of U.S. forces in Iraq, and a leading critic, the Senate's #2 Democrat, Dick Durbin. Casey and Durbin, live, only on Fox News Sunday. Also a move to censure President Bush over that NSA wiretap program. Does this give a political boost to Democrats or Republicans? We'll poll our Sunday regulars, Britt Hume, Mara Eliason, Bill Kristol, and Juan Williams. And our Power Player of the Week runs the government's most controversial new program. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And good morning again from Fox News in Washington. Let's start with a quick check of the latest headlines. Former Iraqi Prime Minister Ayad Allawi says his country is in a state of civil war and is nearing the point of no return in sectarian violence. Allawi fears the turmoil will spill over into other Middle East countries. But Defense Secretary Rumsfeld says terrorists in Iraq know they are losing the conflict there. Writing in the Washington Post today, Rumsfeld says pulling out of Iraq early would be the equivalent of handing post-war Germany back to the Nazis. And in Iraq this morning, tens of thousands of local police and military are guarding the holy city of Karbala. Shiite pilgrims there are observing a religious holiday. Well, on this third anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, we want to review where the war stands with General George Casey, the commander of multinational forces in Iraq, who joins us now live from Baghdad. And General, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Chris.
General, 3 years in, how is the war going, well or badly?
Chris, I think 3 years into this, I think we have made great progress. The Iraqi people have made great progress. And if you think about it, 3 years ago, Saddam Hussein was still in charge of the country. Now he's on trial and will be held accountable by the Iraqi people. And the leaders, the new political leaders of Iraq are meeting almost around the clock, discussing how to form a representative government of national unity that will ensure that the rights and the interests of all Iraqis, regardless of ethnic and sectarian group, are met. That's huge progress. And if you think about what's happened just in 2005, 3 national polls in the course of the year, turnout got higher, violence got lower. If you think about the progress that's been made with the Iraqi security forces, really from almost nothing to the point now where 2 of the Iraqi divisions, 13 of the Iraqi brigades, and almost 60 of the Iraqi military and special police battalions are actually in the lead conducting counterinsurgency operations across Iraq. So is there violence in Iraq? Sure. Is there terrorism in Iraq? Sure. And the terrorists and the insurgents are doing everything in their power to convince both the Iraqis and our publics that this endeavor can't succeed. But I think the Iraqis are right now, after the good work of the last 3 years, are standing on the threshold of a very significant step toward their future.
But General, let me ask you about former Prime Minister Allawi, who said today that Iraq is in a civil war with an average of 50 to 60 people being killed every day in sectarian violence. If that isn't a civil war, what would be?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with the former Prime Minister, and it's been a while since I've talked to him about the security situation because he's been out of the country. But I will tell you, the violence in Iraq is not necessarily widespread. There is sectarian tension and there is sectarian violence, but it's primarily focused in the center of the country around Baghdad. In 15 of the 18 provinces, there are 6 or less incidents of violence a day. That's not just sectarian, that's all kinds of violence. In 12 of the provinces, it's 2 or less incidents of violence a day. So the country is not awash in sectarian violence. Are there people going out and killing people for sectarian reasons? Yes, there are. And we, working with the Iraqi security forces, are doing everything in our power to prevent that and to protect the Iraqi people. But I personally don't believe, one, that we're there now, two, that civil war is imminent, and three, that it is inevitable that it will happen. I believe that as the leadership of this country comes forward, forms the government of national unity, and that begins to move forward, I believe you'll gradually see these tensions ebb.
One of your top generals, Peter Corelli, said this week that he believes by late summer that Iraq will own, as he put it, 75% of Iraq's battle space. First of all, do you stand by that, General? And secondly, are they going to be taking over those areas where you say that there is no violence, or are they actually going to take over some areas where there is now serious fighting?
I think both, Chris. And I do believe that by the end of the summer, 75% or so of the Iraqi brigades will be in the lead in their own battle space around Iraq. As I mentioned earlier, there are already 13 of those brigades that are at that point. I also think that by the end of the year, 8 out of 10 of the Iraqi Army divisions will be in the same position. And I think you know, that, or you may not, that we are also shifting some focus to the police in 2006 so that we can bring the Iraqi local police to the point where they can begin assuming the lead in providing domestic order across Iraq toward the end of this year and into 2007. So I do agree with what Pete has said there about where the Iraqi security forces are capable of going in 2006.
General, of course, what concerns most Americans the most is bringing more American troops back home. I want to play what you said about that last July of 2005. Here it is.
If the political process continues to go positively, and if the development of the security forces continues to go as it is going, I do believe we'll still be able to take some fairly substantial reductions after these elections in the spring and summer next year.
General, given the situation now, do you still believe that there will be, as you put it, fairly substantial reductions in U.S. forces this spring?
Chris, the reductions have already begun, and I think you'll recall that just prior to Christmas, I told the Secretary of Defense and the President that I did not need 2 of the brigades that were intended to come over here to Iraq. So we actually have already begun the reductions of our combat forces. I also said at that time that I would review the situation periodically and make my recommendations. And I still intend to do that. Obviously, we're looking closely at the assumptions that are driving this. I think we're doing fine on the security forces, and I think the political process is going in the right direction, but it's not done yet, and so we'll keep our eyes on that closely.
General,
but I do believe that over 2006, we will continue to see a gradual reduction in coalition forces.
General, we checked, and at the time that you said that there were 138,000 troops in Iraq. There now, although there was a buildup, as you point out, for the elections, that dropped down to basically the same baseline. There are 133,000 there now. So do you expect to see fairly substantial reductions below this 130,000 number over the course of the next few months?
Maybe not over the course of the next few months, but certainly over the course of 2006 and into 2007. Like I said, we'll continue to evaluate the situation, and I'll make my recommendations as I evaluate the situation on the ground.
Do you think it's more or less likely, sir, that we're going to reach what some people at the Pentagon were talking about, getting below 100,000 troops by the end of this year?
Chris, I've really resisted talking numbers or putting any numbers on this. All of these reductions are conditions-based, and I wouldn't want to get hung on a number.
Let me change subjects with you. The White House now says that U.S. diplomats are going to talk to Iranian officials about the situation in Iraq. What do you want them to tell the Iranians?
Well, that's a political call there, and whether they do or not, I think will obviously be made between the State Department and the White House. I certainly would want to discuss what we see as improvised explosive device technology coming from the country of Iran into Iraq and being used against coalition forces. That needs to stop.
What about the infiltration of some Iraqi militias, or rather Iranian militias, Revolutionary Guard into the country?
We are not seeing large, certainly large infiltration of Iranian militias into Iraq. Whether or not there are agents from the Revolutionary Guards in here is another question. But I have not seen any, as you called it, large militia movements from Iran into Iraq.
General, how much confidence do you have that the Iranians will do anything to help us in Iraq?
I must say, Chris, I don't have great confidence. They're playing, I think, a very delicate balancing act. On the one hand, they want a stable neighbor. On the other hand, I don't believe they want to see us succeed here. So it is a very delicate balancing act, and frankly, I guess I don't have a lot of confidence that these will turn out to be productive, but I could be wrong.
Let me turn, if we can. You've talked about the political situation. An awful lot of people see a stalemate there. It's been more than 3 months since the Iraqis held their election. The National Assembly met this week, but there's still no government. The politicians are still haggling. In fact, some of them talked about another month of negotiations. At a time when we have 130,000 young men and women fighting and dying in Iraq, and the politicians are sitting there arguing with each other, why shouldn't the American people feel outraged by this, sir?
Chris, I would not want to characterize the very, very difficult discussions that are going on now between the political leadership in Iraq as any kind of dithering. They are working very hard. I'm not directly involved with this, but the Ambassador Khalilzad is working very, very closely with them. And I can only tell you what he's told me, and that is the last several sessions that they have had have been very productive and very substantive, and he feels that the leaders are committed to going forward as rapidly as possible. But as you can imagine, after 35 years living under a dictator, they are working through some very difficult issues about how to craft this government to ensure that the rights of all the different ethnic and sectarian groups are represented.
But General Casey,
take a little time. But,
General Casey, if I can, let me just put up something that Ambassador Khalilzad said the other day. He said, "The country is bleeding and moving towards civil war. It is the responsibility of Iraqi politicians to feel the pain of the people and understand their needs." He certainly seems to be frustrated with the slow efforts, dithering, haggling, whatever you want to call it. He seems to be somewhat frustrated at how the political process is going. As I say, it's been more than 3 months, sir.
Yeah, my recollection is that comment, it was a comment that he used to spur the political leadership into a little greater action. And as I can only tell you, as I said, what he told me after the last several sessions that he's had with him.
General, finally, I want to put up a Fox News Opinion Dynamics poll that's out this week. Here it is, sir. When asked, will there eventually be a free, stable government in Iraq, 34% say yes, 55% say no. And when asked, does the U.S. have a responsibility to stay in Iraq until democracy is established, 48% now say no. Back in 2003, 58% said yes. General, can you lose this war on the home front?
Well, Chris, that's a political judgment. Monday, the president was quite strong in his commitment to the mission here. And I will tell you that I'm fairly confident that this, what we're doing here in Iraq, ultimately will be successful. Will there be some tough days ahead? Sure. This is hard business, both in fighting the insurgency, in building the government, and rebuilding the economy. There's a lot of hard work still to be done here in Iraq, but I'm optimistic that we will ultimately be successful here.
General Casey, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking with us, and we thank you and all of our troops over there for your service to our nation, sir. Up next, Democrats and the war. What is their plan for Iraq? We'll talk with the Senate's #2 Democrat after this break.
Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, sponsored in part by Zurich, because change happens.
What happens if your latest product goes global in a single bound? What happens when new technology overcomes carelessness? What happens if reducing stress reduces accidents too? What happens if your business model changes every 4 hours? At Zurich, we consider all sorts of possibilities. It's why for nearly 100 years, we've provided relevant, secure insurance solutions for a changing world. Zurich, because change happens.
There is a gap. The world doesn't produce enough energy today to meet tomorrow's needs. Natural gas is an answer, and ConocoPhillips is taking action, creating a new facility to deliver new supply. It's the first of its kind built in decades, and it's just in time. So don't worry. You can always count on us to elevate.
The Lenovo ThinkPad tablet, powered by Windows XP Tablet PC Edition.
Beginning tomorrow, two of television's greatest thrillers, Prison Break and 24, are on one blockbuster night. It all begins with the breakout hit of the season.
It's time.
Prison Break. Then it's TV's biggest adrenaline rush, 24.
Put your hands up!
TV Guide says the new Fox Monday just might be the most intense night of TV in history. It all starts at 8/7 Central tomorrow on Fox. Viewer discretion advised.
Joining us now to discuss Iraq and other national security issues is the #2 Democrat in the Senate, Dick Durbin, who joins us from Chicago. And Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you.
Let me start by asking you the same question I asked General Casey. On this 3rd anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, how's the war going?
Well, let me say first, I want to thank the General, as you did, and all the troops in uniform for their service to our country and risking their lives every single day for us. Having said that, I think that the political leaders in Washington have failed when it comes to our policy in Iraq. They misled us into believing there were weapons of mass destruction and connections between 9/11 and Saddam Hussein. None of that existed. They did not provide the necessary troops, the necessary equipment, and the necessary leadership at a time when we needed it. We've lost over 2,300 of our bravest and best Americans to date. There's no end in sight. And as you said in the opening segment, even our own ambassador is acknowledging the fact that we've opened Pandora's box, and the leaders have said in Iraq that we're facing nothing short of civil war. Here we are in the 3rd anniversary with no end in sight.
Well, let me play the other side of that equation, if I can, Senator. This week, one of the top generals in Iraq said that U.S. forces should be able to hand over 75% of the battle space to the Iraqis by the end of the summer. Isn't that precisely the kind of significant transition that you Democrats have been calling for?
And the clip that you played earlier from General Casey, the same promises were made a year ago. The real test of when the Iraqis are ready to defend themselves is when they replace American troops who come home. Otherwise, this is all rhetoric. And I've spoken to leaders in our military just this week in my office who have told me over and over again they just made serious mistakes in the beginning. They assumed that if they just ramped up the number of Iraqis who were going to be called defense forces, that was all they needed to do. It isn't enough. We still don't have Iraqi forces ready to stand and fight on their own. When American troops start coming home, then the president can start pointing to pride with Iraqi replacements.
But Senator, when you hear General Corelli, when you hear General Casey today saying he agrees that 75% of the battle space is going to be owned by Iraqis by the end of the summer, are you saying you don't believe it?
Well, I hope it's true, but we've heard this before. The real test is when American soldiers come home. We've heard this for years now, and this administration has no plan. It has no strategy. The Senate said in a strong bipartisan vote, 79 to 19, this had to be a year of transition, a year when the Iraqis took control of their own security and showed us the kind of leadership in their government that indicates that this will come to an end in a peaceful and democratic way.
This week, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the national security advisor to Jimmy Carter back in the 70s, accused the Democrats, his own party, of political desertion on Iraq. And let's put up his quote if we can. He said, Democratic leaders have been silent or evasive. They have not offered an alternative to the war in Iraq. It's easy to criticize. Senator, you talk about the lack of an administration plan. What is the Democratic plan? And be specific. What's the Democratic plan for Iraq?
I'll be very specific, but I can tell you to start with, failed policies such as the one we have in Iraq gives us few options, and we understand that. We've been painted into a corner in this situation.
Well, that's criticism, sir. What is your plan?
Well, hold on if you will, please. What we proposed and what Senator John Warner accepted as a bipartisan approach in the Senate includes the following. This year, 2006, a year of transition where the Iraqis take control of their own security and defense. Secondly, the Iraqis have put on notice they have to form a government that embraces all of the factions within Iraq so that we can see finally a government of unity leading to some sort of progress for the people of Iraq. And finally, we have to have from this president accountability, clear accountability where he says every 3 months what progress is being made. His first report, incidentally, was not an encouraging one. It's an indication that despite all the rhetoric, we have not made progress this year.
But saying a year of significant transition, with all due respect, sir, is just a phrase. I mean, you know the situation there. There are 133,000 troops on the ground. Is it the Democratic plan that you could get all of them out by the end of the year? 30,000, get under 100,000? What's the Democratic plan?
My wish is to bring the troops home as quickly as possible.
Well, that's everyone's wish, sir.
Withdrawing them tomorrow is not realistic. But I will say this. We believe that if this president has a plan, and I'm not sure that he does, that it'll be demonstrated by the end of the year that Iraqi forces will replace American forces. If they do not, it's further indication of the failure of this administration.
Senator, I want to change subjects on you. Democratic Senator Feingold this week called for censuring President Bush for the NSA's warrantless wiretap program. Given the fact that the president briefed congressional leaders of both parties, given the fact that he got specific legal authorization for this program from the Attorney General, do you flatly disavow the idea of censuring the president?
I'll tell you point blank that to argue that there was some sort of a briefing of members of Congress is to ignore the obvious. 96 senators have not heard any details of what is happening with this warrantless wiretap. In addition, there are only 8 members of the Senate Intelligence Committee who are now being given some sort of a briefing. Let me tell you what I believe led to Senator Feingold's censure resolution. The utter frustration that this Republican Senate refuses to ask the hard questions in oversight of this administration about this war, about the use of warrantless wiretaps, about statements made by the president to the American people that there'll be no wiretapping without court orders. We know now that in many of these instances, the American people deserve answers, and this Republican Senate has refused to do it. I think that's why Senator Feingold introduced this resolution. It's been sent to the Judiciary Committee. It could be heard as early as next week.
Senator, have you been briefed on the NSA warrantless wiretap program?
No, I've not.
At my understanding, in fact, I'm sure that Senator Feingold has not either, but Dianne Feinstein is one of the few Senate Democrats who has, in fact, been briefed on the program, and I want to put up what she said this week. She said the administration would be well advised to brief the full Intelligence Committee. I think it's a very impressive program. Senator, it seems that the senators who are criticizing this program the most are the ones who know the least about it.
Let me suggest to you that we have a law that this president and every president should follow. We want the president and this administration to wiretap those who would threaten the security of this country. But we want this president and every president to follow the law, not to break the law. And even though Senator Feinstein and I have had a brief conversation, she couldn't go into any details because of the classification. She says she thinks this is an important program. Well, we have a law that the president should follow if this program is going to make America safer.
Well, but the fact is, I mean, you make it sound, when the administration proposed this law for the first time back in late 2001, early 2002, they briefed congressional leaders, including Tom Daschle, the Senate Minority Leader.
But to suggest that a briefing of 2 or 3 members of the United States Senate means that the president can break the law is completely wrong.
Then why didn't Tom Daschle, why didn't the Democratic leaders do something about it?
Having served on the Intelligence Committee, I can tell you they put you in a box. They tell you the secret information and then say you're sworn to secrecy. You can't repeat it. So to suggest that you can then hold a president or any member of the administration accountable publicly would mean that you'd have to break the law and leak information to the press, which many of us are loath to do, as we should be. So we're in a terrible situation here, being given information and you can't do anything with it. At this point, we have heard from Senator Specter, the Republican leader of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There is no constitutional basis for this warrantless wiretap. We have heard statements by the president that have misled the American people about this program. We clearly need the oversight of a Senate Intelligence Committee, which has abdicated its responsibility. It has become a partisan cover-up operation. I'm sorry to say that, but we should have a fully engaged, a bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee taking a look at this warrantless wiretap.
Senator, Republicans say that the censure proposal is the leading edge of a Democratic plan to impeach this president if you regain control of Congress in 2006. And in fact, Senator Feingold has not dismissed the notion. Take a listen.
I think this actually is in the area of an impeachable offense. I think it is right in the strike zone of what the founding fathers thought about when they talked about high crimes and misdemeanors.
Senator, as a Democratic leader, do you rule out impeachment of the president if the Democrats regain control of Congress?
I don't believe that that is even a valuable discussion at this point, but I do believe it's valuable that Senator Feingold is moving us forward to finally be a catalyst to have the kind of hearings and the kind of deliberations as to what lies behind this warrantless wiretap situation, how this president can avoid the law, which is very clear on the subject. Now, I think it really calls on the members of the Senate, it should have long before the Feingold resolution, to take initiative. But this Republican Senate has refused, in most instances, the kind of oversight that is very fundamental and basic to our government. The real exception I want to add is Senator Orlin Specter, who in the Senate Judiciary Committee did have 2 public hearings on the issue. But more needs to be done by a Senate Intelligence Committee which has refused to even take up the oversight of this program. That is something that I think the American people deserve.
Senator, you said that the impeachment question is not a valuable discussion to have now. You didn't rule it out.
I can't rule anything out until the investigation's complete. I don't want to prejudge it. But if this president or any president violates the law, it has to be held accountable. And that accountability, of course, is in the hands of the United States House of Representatives and the Senate.
So you're saying that impeachment is a possibility?
I'm not ruling it in or out at this point in time. I think in fairness to our government and to be as honest as I can be, we need more information about the nature of this program and whether, in fact, it violated the law.
Senator, Senator, I want to follow up on this because I'm a little bit surprised. You're saying that President Bush, who is the commander-in-chief in a time of war, you're not ruling out the possibility that he has broken the law, committed high crimes and misdemeanors, and could be subject to impeachment?
Chris, you're trying to put words in my mouth.
No, you said that you're not ruling it in or out, sir.
What I'm saying is that we need an investigation. We have a responsibility to ask the hard questions, to find out what the nature of the program is and whether the president violated the law. You want to move it to some extreme. I can understand that's what happens on these Sunday morning talk shows. I'm not going there. But I do know that as a member of the Senate, we all have a responsibility to hold every president accountable. If this president has broken the law, if he has violated the Constitution, that is a very serious charge.
And at this point, from what you know, do you believe that, in fact, he has violated the law and violated the Constitution?
At this point, I can find no explanation from this administration to justify this warrantless wiretap.
So the answer to my question as to breaking the law and violating the Constitution?
Well, I'm waiting for more information, and you would think the information would be forthcoming, as Senate Judiciary Committee hearings and Senate Intelligence Committee hearings would give us that information. Unfortunately, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee has refused to engage the kind of oversight which we expect of that traditionally bipartisan committee.
Senator Durbin, we're going to have to leave it there. We want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll ask our gang of Sunday regulars about the move to censure the president. Is it helping Democrats or helping Republicans? We'll be right back.
It's a fact. The more we learn about how to take care of ourselves and our families, the longer and healthier our lives become.
That's why more people turn to WebMD than any other health information source. It's a place where people find answers to health questions with an ease never before possible, where doctors discover new and better ways to care for their patients. A place where everyone can finally forge a link between better information and better health. WebMD.
I won't take calls if they hand me down, 'cause once I get started I go to town. 'Cause I'm not like everybody else. I'm not like everybody else. Like everybody else. Like everybody else. Like everybody else. Like everybody else.
On an all-new Bones, an ancient secret takes Dr. Temperance Brennan into the depths of the earth.
I just hope that she was dead before the rats got to her.
The episode that will keep you guessing till the very end.
Wondering whether or not to shoot? You shoot.
And let you do the talking.
Yeah, well, I took that one for granted.
Bones, all new at its new time, 8/7 Central, Fox Wednesday. Viewer discretion advised.
Jobs. Veterans, healthcare.
Over the past 2 years, the Potawatomi have paid more than $100 million to state and local governments. That's more than any business paid in Wisconsin.
Emergency vehicle.
Over the next 25 years, these payments will top $1 billion. The Potawatomi, working with you to help give all of us a better quality of life.
Really good people make really good credit counselors.
It's a commitment. It's a commitment between the client and the counselor on the phone that we've worked together. We came up with this plan, and together we're going to make it work. You're not alone. It's a partnership.
When you struggle with credit card bills every month, Care One Credit Counseling can help.
We help people. That is what we do.
Care One for you.
Now, insights on aesthetics, the latest in cosmetic and reconstructive surgery. Today's topic, liposuction with Dr. Kevin Miterman from the Center for Aesthetics and Plastic Surgery.
People have liposuction done because you can get a permanent change in the contour of an area of the body. Liposuction isn't a replacement for exercise. Usually, even people who exercise regularly have specific spots that bother them that no matter how much exercise they do, just because of genetics, they can't seem to reduce. The recovery is, compared to other surgeries, one of the easy recoveries in that because the incisions are so small, people can get back to most normal activities in 2 or 3 days and back to full exercise in probably less than 2 weeks. Fortunately, the fat removal is permanent and will never return to those spots again. If you're going to have any kind of surgery, I recommend looking for board-certified surgeons in an accredited facility.
For more information on liposuction, contact the Center for Aesthetics and Plastic Surgery.
Rely on Fox 11's chief meteorologist, Patrick Powell, for severe weather coverage.
When the President of the United States breaks the law, he must be held accountable.
I do believe this is a political stunt that is addressed at attacking the President of the United States of America when we're at war.
That was part of the Senate debate this week over Democratic Senator Feingold's plan to censure the president. And it's panel time now for our Sunday regulars. Britt Hume, Washington managing editor of Fox News, and Fox News contributors Mara Liasson of National Public Radio, Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard, and Juan Williams also from National Public Radio. Well, folks, I got to tell you, usually you kind of expect or think you know what people are gonna say when you ask them a question. I have to say, Britt, I was genuinely surprised that Senator Durbin, the #2 Democrat in the Senate, went as far as he did today about the possibility of impeaching the president.
I think it illustrates as clearly as anything yet has, Chris, the fact that if the Democrats get control of one house or the other, we're more likely to get the House, I presume, and that's, of course, where impeachments occur, that the impeachment will be on the agenda. The Republicans are claiming this. Senator Durbin has, by not ruling it out, as other Democrats have, and he is, after all, the assistant leader, has come pretty close to confirming that, indeed, it is there.
Well, the interesting thing about this week is that the Feingold censure effort thrilled and excited the Republican Party like no other issue that I've seen come down the pike recently. It was almost like a relief from all the troubles that they've been having. And all of a sudden, here were the Democrats giving the Republicans a gift, a political gift that they could try to rally their base with. And then you heard all these editorials about how the real agenda is impeachment. It's not just censure. Now, that's certainly true that in the House there is a group of Democrats that have raised the idea of impeachment, and among the Democrats' liberal base, there are people who are enthusiastic about it. But most of the Democrats I talked to this week felt that Feingold's effort was terribly unhelpful, to put it mildly, that he changed the subject from Republicans being on the defensive to Democrats' effort to get the president. And I was actually surprised, too, that Durbin left the door open as much as he did.
How do you explain that? I mean, because I agree with you that the Democratic leaders in both the House and the Senate,
from
Nancy
the top
Pelosi,
to the bottom,
had
were
been
quite unhappy that Feingold had done this. He hadn't consulted them. They are trying to have a unified message of the day. Here he goes off in a completely different direction. And, you know, I thought that what the Democrats wanted to do was say, look, you know, the president might be wrong, and maybe at some point the Supreme Court will rule as to whether this warrantless wiretapping program was constitutional or not. But a high crime and misdemeanor is something quite different. I mean, the president believes that he has a prerogative under the Constitution to do this. Many people, including many Republicans and constitutional scholars, think he doesn't. Sometime that's going to have to be adjudicated and resolved. I don't know how I explain this. Maybe there's more support for impeachment in the Democratic Party than I found from talking to Democrats this week.
I think Feingold's smarter than the Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate, and I think he deserves some credit for taking a principled stand. And I honestly believe that, in fact, he's winning this debate right now. We're sitting here talking about, well, the censure, that's politically unwise. Who's defending the president's NSA action? Suddenly everyone's talking about warrantless wiretapping. It's on the table, as Mara just said, that, well, maybe he doesn't have legal justification. Impeachment would be too much, but it's certainly fair to question what he's done. I think Feingold has succeeded in casting a big cloud over the president's program here.
So you think this is helping Democrats and hurting Republicans?
Absolutely. As long as the charge is out there and is not rebutted, it helps. And I think it's out there, and Feingold makes his case coherently. He's an impressive politician. He's been elected twice in a state that's not that, you know, a state that's a competitive state. 3 times, I guess, actually, in a competitive state, Wisconsin. And I think it's very much helping his presidential race.
Well, let me just add one thing on that before we go on. Let's take a look, if we can, at the Rasmussen poll that was out this week. This speaks specifically to the issue of helping himself with the Democrats. This was a poll of Democrats, and when they first asked him, what do you think of Feingold? As you can see, it was 22-16. People didn't know a whole lot about him. Then they said, oh, that's the guy who has proposed the censure motion. Suddenly, 52% of Democrats favored Senator Feingold.
Absolutely. I mean,
crazy like a fox?
Well, I think it's not crazy like a fox. I think lots of Americans think that he's taking a principled stand, and only Tom Harkin, to support Mara's point, only Tom Harkin has put his name in support.
A boxer has too.
A boxer, okay. So two Democrats in support of this. Pretty much the leadership has said they don't want it. They consider it a distraction, off message. But what you do see here is that someone is saying that the president has to be held accountable. And there's no question that there was unauthorized use of wiretaps. No warrant granted. I mean, that argument is so weak. That's why I think Bill says that the president and the Republicans will lose that argument, because if you ask people about it, what they'll say is, well, on the basis of it, we impeached President Clinton for what? Messing around with the intern, but we're not going to impeach a president who's actually violating the laws of the United States. There's something out of kilter here.
I agree with Bill that this is good politics in terms of the Democratic Party for Feingold, and the survey you showed backs that up. I don't agree, however, that this is a smart move on his part in terms of damaging the president on this issue. Yeah, it gets a couple of days with people talking about the illegality of the wiretap program, but that program has proved surprisingly, not to say astonishingly, popular with the public. Should we listen in on al-Qaeda conversations in the United States or al-Qaeda-related conversations? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes. Senator Feingold is in a peculiar position, as you pointed out in your interview with Senator Durbin, to be talking so confidently about how illegal all this is when he hasn't been, is not among those who's been briefed on the program and is essentially therefore talking through his hat. I don't think that's a winner in the long term for the Democrats, although, you know, all kinds of wacky ideas, including impeachment, have a great deal of traction in the Democratic Party. Mara referred to some in the Democratic base who feel that way. I would say that a majority and probably a quite distinct majority in the Democratic base feel that way, which is, depending on how you look at it, either a burden for the party in general, or perhaps in the case of Senator Feingold, a blessing.
But you mixed up two things. You mixed up the idea of the popularity of the program with its legality. I don't think I've met an American who says we shouldn't be doing everything we can to prevent another terrorist attack against this country, including surveilling these conversations. But it's not the question people say, oh yeah, therefore we don't need the judges, we don't need the Congress, we don't need anything but to put our trust in the president.
If I'm not mistaken, the leaders of Congress were fully and completely and repeatedly briefed on this. And for Senator Durbin to say, as he did, that those leaders really were powerless to do anything about it because it's classified is utter nonsense. Any of them could very easily have objected in a letter to the president in strong terms.
They did object.
No, excuse me, they did not. There was one weak, little weird, sort of slightly incomprehensible letter from Senator Rockefeller,
yes,
which was followed up by him in no way whatever. They were in the room with the vice president. The vice president shared the briefings. They could all have objected noisily to this if they suspected it was illegal. They also could have done a great deal of constitutional research into the hypothetical question of whether such a thing would be legal or not. There is not one scintilla of evidence that any of them did that. The idea that this is illegal springs from the fact that it got into the New York Times, and politicians within the Democratic Party decided it was a good idea to chase that idea around. It is by no means a settled matter that it was illegal. There's very good reason to believe that the inherent constitutional powers of the president, and possibly even the grant of the use of force to repel al-Qaeda, would have authorized him to do this. So it's no settled question.
The New York Times took 1 year, gave the president so much leeway. Democratic politicians, exactly? They did not report the story for 1 year.
Why not?
The Democratic, because out of respect for this president and our fight against terrorists. I mean, and not everything is politics, Britt. Sometimes you're concerned about the welfare of our state, of our country, and the New York Times waited a year. Democratic politicians granted him sufficient leeway. They say the briefing was inexact and vague as to what was saying. They didn't realize about the nature of
no reason to believe
the surveillance taking place here within the United States on American citizens.
Juan, that is absurd. No politician among those who has been thoroughly briefed on this claims that the briefings were insufficient and vague. Rockefeller does not claim that. Rockefeller has said many things about this program, but he has never said that he wasn't fully briefed. That I know.
Just to get back to the politics of this for 1 minute, the question that Bill raised, which I think is an interesting one, that this isn't helping Republicans. I mean, this is the kind of thing that people like Paul Weyrich said this week. If Republicans, activists see the president endangered by this threat of theoretical impeachment, if the Democrats get the House back, they'll rally around the president. You have a series of bad polls for him, his approval ratings in the 30s. You know, there's a range of them, but they're not good. People very pessimistic about Iraq. And my question is, will the rallying cry that conservatives are now saying that impeachment is down the road if Democrats win the House, will that actually work to rally people to the president's side or not?
The brief final word.
No, Republicans cannot go to a midterm election saying, re-elect a Republican Congress to protect the president from impeachment. They have to make a substantive case for the president's policies, and the reason Feingold's move is very smart for him personally as a Democratic presidential candidate, but is smart for the Democratic Party is he's going at a strength of President Bush. You don't get in politics only to play at issues where you already have public opinion on your side. He's trying to change public opinion. I disagree with him. I hope he doesn't succeed in changing public opinion, but so far he's making the case that it's illegal. He's going to have editorial pages backing him up, and the Republicans are just whining that, ooh, he's trying to censure the president. They're not making a substantive case in defense of the program.
Time out, panel. We need to take a break here, but coming up, the 3rd anniversary of the war in Iraq. Where are we on the front lines and here on the home front? We'll tackle that one in a moment.
Hydrogen cars? I'm cool with that. Since a lot of the hydrogen that we'll be using will be created as a byproduct of clean coal power plants, we'll be less dependent on foreign oil. Want to learn more? Check this out.
We see brilliant young minds designing software that helps students find the books they need, creating a way for musicians to connect online and jam, chasing ideas, competing in the Microsoft Imagine Cup, training for brilliant futures. Find out more.
In between practice runs, it's a scramble to modify Tony's car. So our team carries Sprint mobile broadband cards to every track. They can wirelessly download performance data from headquarters and make adjustments that make a difference.
We drop the track bar and close the shocks up.
All right, let's try it. We said yes to making better decisions faster. We're all card-carrying yes men.
With Sprint Business, you can make just about any place a workplace. Now you can get a free mobile broadband card with an unlimited data access plan. Yes, you can.
So my room can get a little dirty, but at least my environment's getting cleaner. Like, did you know that even though the use of coal to generate electricity has tripled since 1970, emissions, they're down 35%. Here, check it out.
On this day in 1979, C-SPAN delivered the first televised session of the U.S. House. C-SPAN is dedicated to airing non-stop coverage of government proceedings and public affairs programming. Stay tuned for more from our panel and our Power Player of the Week.
NASCAR's top drivers head south. Today, the Golden Corral 500, presented by DLP HD TV on Fox.
The great philosopher Nietzsche said, "From chaos comes order." Obviously, Mr. Nietzsche never had to move. Of course, if he did, he must have used two men and a truck. They offer a variety of ways to eliminate the chaos and confusion that often comes with moving, from a complete packaging and unpacking, or just a simple pickup and delivery. And if all you need are supplies, they've got boxes, packaging, labels, all kinds of professional mover stuff. So if you're planning a move soon, call two men and a truck, and plan on a lot less chaos.
I walked out of the basement to see my home totally gone. Nothing but a bunch of lumber and bricks.
When something like this happens, you wonder how you're ever going to get your life back.
American family really came through for us.
They far exceeded my expectations. You hope you never have a fire. You hope you never have a tornado wipe away your house. But this is what you buy insurance for, is the way we were treated.
American Family Insurance.
There is no middle ground. The enemy will emerge from Iraq one of two ways: emboldened or defeated.
That was the president this week stating his case for the war in Iraq in the starkest terms. And we're back now with Britt, Mara, Bill, and Juan. So, 3 years after shock and awe, Britt, where do we stand now with our involvement in Iraq?
We are at war in Iraq, and the Iraqi people and increasingly their military forces are at war with basically Al-Qaeda and some allies within Iraq. That is what this has come to. I don't think the American military planners or anyone else anticipated that this would be what happens, but this is what's happened. It is unimaginable that this organization that is wantonly murdering and indiscriminately killing people is popular in Iraq the way insurgencies, at least to some extent, usually are. That doesn't mean it won't go on for a while. Historic and remarkable things have happened there. In retrospect, some years out, we may look back on them and think that they happened at warp speed. It doesn't appear that way today, and the public is frustrated with what it thinks is the lack of progress in the war. And whether that can be turned around in time to say the Republicans in the fall is not clear, but that's the issue. That's the only real issue. All of the president's troubles in the polls all relate to Iraq. If Iraq, the situation there improves, his situation will improve, and so will that of his party.
Yeah, I agree that Iraq is kind of the central issue affecting the president's political fortunes, but I also think there's something else happening in Iraq other than just the U.S. and Iraqi forces against the insurgency, and that's this spate of sectarian violence and the question of whether the Iraqis are going to form an inclusive, non-sectarian government, and whether the kind of whatever you want to call it, low-level warfare, I don't think it's an outright civil war yet, but the armed conflict and violence between Shiites and Sunnis is going to get solved. And I think that is what's responsible for the American public's pessimism recently about the future in Iraq. Now, when American people see purple fingers on TV, you know, Iraqis going to the polls, usually the polls here show that Americans are very optimistic about the prospects for a stable democracy there. The news from Iraq has been about sectarian violence, not just about the insurgency, and I think that's the reason for the pessimism.
Bill, where do you see the situation right now?
I think we're at war, as the president said, and we have to win the war. And I think we will win the war. I wish we'd stop always talking about drawing down our troops, which I think makes it harder to win the war. And in this respect, I think reading Don Rumsfeld's op-ed today in the Washington Post makes me even more amazed that Bush has not removed him as Secretary of Defense. I mean, Rumsfeld has an op-ed in which he talks about the situation in post-war Iraq. But we're at war. And he has, for 3 years, tried to jump to the post-war Iraq without winning the war in Iraq. There's a devastating op-ed in the New York Times by Major General Eaton, who retired from the Army after 33 years this year, who served in Iraq, criticizing Rumsfeld. I think we can win the war. We will win the war. I just wish we had a Secretary of Defense who spent more time thinking about winning the war.
Gee, I took away something totally different from the op-ed. I thought he made a strong case. You know, he said it's like leaving, you know, post-war Germany and letting the Nazis back in. I thought it was a compelling argument for his side, but I didn't think it was compelling. But I understand your point that we are at war, and he's got to be about winning the war. But you're in favor of putting more boots on the ground, as they say. I just don't think that has any political salability in the American mind. At this point, it is about pulling people back. It's 3 years in, Bill. 3 years in which you go from, they've got weapons of mass destruction. They didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Then it's a matter of, oh, he's a despot and he's a terrible man. And Saddam Hussein was all that. But would the American people have gone to war simply to push him out? I don't think so. And then you go to argument, well, this is about democracy. Would the American people really have gone to war? Do we really believe that it's possible to impose democracy on Iraq at this point? I'm a big fan of democracy and rights. You can imagine, given my interest in civil rights in this country, but I just think at this point that may be too much in terms of resources, in terms of the blood, American blood that has been shed. It's too high a toll. And I think that's why you're seeing the American people say, enough. We put in for this, and it's not a matter of cut and run, which is what some people, or lack of patriotism. How can you question the American resolve after the extent of the commitment that we have demonstrated?
Chris, I'd like to call attention to reports from a couple of people who have just come back from there. Both of them have been sharply critical of the military and the way the war has been handled. One of them has been nearly as critical of Rumsfeld as Bill has, and that would be Ralph Peters, who is a columnist now, an author, military man by trade. He's been harshly critical, and he came back and said he's just been there. He was there at the height of the so-called civil war that broke out after the bombing of the mosque. He said he couldn't find it there. He was all over the place. He didn't see it. What he saw was a situation which is clearly getting better, and Iraqi troops which are getting better, and a situation in which the terrorists, despite their continued ability to maim and kill people, are losing. Similar report now from David Ignatius of the Washington Post, who has been a consistent critic of the handling of the war. He came back and said that in terms of the political and military formulation over there now, that we've now, at long last in his view, got it right. That being the case, I think you know, the idea that Rumsfeld isn't thinking about winning the war, Bill, it's a matter, that's a semantic argument you're making there. It isn't a real argument. I suspect that Rumsfeld really thinks of very little else most days. And I think that we ought to heed those who have been critics, who have been there recently, and hear what they say.
Mara, how much, when you look at the polls and you just get your sense of talking to politicians up on the Hill, how much do you think the public has turned against this war? And could we reach a point, do you believe, where they could put enough pressure on congressional Republicans that they could, in effect, get the president to change his course?
You mean to pull out troops before he feels the military situation?
No, I don't mean a total pullout, but to change direction.
Well, in terms of changing direction, I'm not even sure what that means. I mean, the president says he wants to bring troops home. This week, what was the big news? They are coming home because we're going to be turning over however many, 75% of the territory to Iraqi forces. So I think you hear this message from the administration, we're going to be coming home in some numbers, not pulling out immediately and altogether. The thing about this idea of a tipping point, I mean, at what point does the American public turn against the war irrevocably? I think the polls are all over the place. In some polls, when you're asked should American troops be brought home immediately, you have in the 20s for that. In other polls, it's in the teens. I don't think we're at the tipping point yet.
Thank you, panel. That's it for today. See you all next week. Up next, our Power Player of the Week.
Epic battery life. The Lenovo ThinkPad X60 with Intel Centrino Duo Mobile technology.
Every day you look for ways to stretch your energy dollar, just as we are looking for new fuel solutions. As you use energy wisely, our industry is searching for new supplies. maximizing efficiency with advanced technology. Working together, consumers, government, industry, we'll ensure diverse, reliable energy to live our lives and keep America going strong. A message from America's oil and natural gas industry.
What's he doing here?
Beats me. Can I help you, sir?
I'm looking for our security.
Yes, sir. Our security is in the network, sir.
This blinky thing is our security?
The security thing is everywhere. The network is, sir.
Let me get this straight. The security is in the blinky thing, and it's in the doohickey next to the blinky thing? This is technical jargon, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Security, powered by Cisco.
He runs the government's most controversial new program, directly affecting some 90 million Americans. Who is he? Our Power Player of the Week.
These are the largest health care programs in the world. $600 billion plus of spending every year on health care for the people who have the most to gain from our health care system.
Dr. Mark McClellan is director of Medicare and Medicaid, programs that provide health care for 1 in 4 Americans. As the federal government prepares for the explosion of baby boomer retirees, McClellan is trying to get ahead of the explosion in costs.
We're turning Medicare from a program that people have counted on to pay the bills when they get sick to a program that puts just as much emphasis on helping them stay well.
That means new screening for diabetes and heart disease, and the new controversial prescription drug benefit.
This plan may be cheaper, but you may have to drive all the way across town to pick up the prescription.
Criticism has been intense that the drug benefit is too complicated, that there are gaps in coverage.
Anytime you bring up a major new program, there will be some unexpected problems, and our job is to make sure we find and fix those problems as quickly as possible.
How do you think you're doing?
Well, I'm very pleased that we're filling millions of prescriptions every day for people who, in many cases, had no coverage before or paying a lot more for their drugs.
If McClellan looks familiar, it's because you've seen his younger brother, Scott, the president's spokesman.
Wait, he knew Saturday night?
How do you feel when you see your brother being savaged by the White House press corps?
We knew growing up in a family with politics in the blood, you know you can't take any of this personally.
He's talking about his mother, Carol Keaton Strayhorn, who was mayor of Austin, Texas, is now the state comptroller, and is running as an independent.
But I promised the people of Texas something more.
Against Republican Governor Rick Perry.
Well, I was the black sheep. Just about everybody in my family is either a lawyer or a politician or both, and that's why I went to medical school. I thought I was going to do something different.
But Dr. McClellan kept getting pulled into government as a domestic policy advisor in the Clinton administration, then as FDA commissioner for old family friend George W. Bush. McClellan sees similarities between practicing medicine and running programs.
When someone comes into you with a problem and you can help them understand how they can solve it. You know, sometimes it's as simple as writing a prescription, and sometimes you can have an easy fix to expand coverage, help people get health care they didn't have before.
There's one more thing you might want to know about McClellan. He grew up a big fan of Star Trek.
How much of a Trekkie were you?
I went to an occasional convention, but that was a long time ago.
You went to an occasional convention? Did you ever meet Spock?
I did. I've got an autograph somewhere. I'll have to dig it out. It's been a long time. I don't think anybody's seen that on national television.
Well, there
before.
you go. And McClellan reminds seniors of the May 15th deadline to register for the new prescription drug benefit. And that's it for today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Fox News Sunday.
Fox News Sunday is a presentation of Fox News.